Simon & Schuster Audio presents The Terminal List, a thriller. Book 1 of the Terminal List series by Jack Carr, read by Ray Porter, with a foreword read by the author.
Forward. Luck is the residue of preparation. The story behind the Amazon Prime Video series adaptation of The Terminal List. How did you do this? That's a question I get quite often, and one I am getting more and more as new readers and listeners discover The Terminal List and become part of my protagonist's journey, and in a sense, a part of my journey as well. How did your debut novel, The Terminal List, become an Amazon Prime Video series starring Chris Pratt, directed by Antoine Fuqua? If you are interested in that story, keep listening. The story of the novel you're listening to goes back to my earliest days, with parents who made reading a natural part of my life. My mother was, and is to this day, a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and developed a love for reading. My paternal grandfather was a Marine Corsair pilot, killed in the Pacific in World War II. I grew up with photos of him and his squadron, his medals, his wings, and his issued escape and evasion maps. My dad and I watched Black Sheep Squadron on television, which was our connection to him and the greatest generation through the medium of popular culture. I was determined to one day serve my country in uniform. Around that same time, I found out about Navy SEALs. There was not much written back in the early 80s about the SEAL teams. You had to dig and put in the effort in the days before the internet. For me, that meant trips to the library with my mom, learning how to research. It was there in the stacks that I began my study of warfare, specifically special operations, irregular warfare, and terrorism. The 1970s and 1980s were a proving ground for international terrorism on the world stage. With the 1970 Dawson Field hijackings, the 1972 Olympics Munich massacre, the 1976 raid on Entebbe, Desert One, and Princess Gate in 1980, the 1983 U.S. Embassy bombing in Beirut, followed months later by the bombing of the Marine barracks and the subsequent U.S. Embassy bombing in Kuwait. William Buckley's 1984 abduction in Beirut, TWA Flight 847, the Achille Laurel hijacking, the Italy airport attacks in 1985, and Pan Am 103 in 1988, among others. All these events during a formative time in my youth as I read and digested every book, magazine article, or newspaper clipping connected to terrorism, warfare, counterterrorism, insurgencies, and counterinsurgencies, and special operations, established a foundation that I continue to build upon today. It was during this phase of my life that I began to read the novels on my parents' shelves. Authors in the mid-'80s, writing in the thriller genre, often created protagonists with backgrounds in Vietnam, as Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces soldiers, Marine snipers, or CIA paramilitary officers. As someone who aspired to one day join those elite ranks, I naturally gravitated to books by Tom Clancy, David Morrell, Nelson DeMille, J.C. Pollock, Frederick Forsyth, Ken Follett, Robert Ludlum, John le Carré, Louis L'Amour, Mark Olden, Stephen Hunter, and A.J. Quinnell. I was also introduced to Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. There was magic in the pages of those books, magic I wanted to create for readers in the future. My calling was clear. My path was set. After my time in the military, I would write thrillers. Fast forward to my last years in the SEAL teams. I had returned from my final Iraq deployment as a task unit commander in Basra. As lieutenant commander, it would be the last time I'd be connected to the troops at the tactical level. It had been a solid run, working my way from an enlisted SEAL sniper to troop commander while the country was at war, with deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, the southern Philippines, and a few other hotspots around the globe. It was time for a new chapter, and there was no doubt in my mind as to what I was going to do next. It was time to write. Perhaps not so coincidentally, readers first encounter my protagonist, Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander and Sniper James Reese, on his final deployment as a troop commander. As I prepared to exit the military, I was assigned to BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?